The store manager's hand cut through the air, the sharp crack of her palm against the black woman's cheek, echoing off the marble floors like a gunshot. "You don't belong here," the manager hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried through the suddenly silent boutique. "This isn't some charity case thrift store. Security, escort this woman out now." Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful content like this. The entire store had frozen. Shoppers holding $1,000 handbags stopped mid-stride. Every eye was locked on this devastating, raw confrontation. The woman who had been struck, Eleanor Vance, stood with an almost impossible composure despite the searing sting on her face and the crushing weight of public humiliation. She didn't cry out. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she calmly wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and did something that sent an icy chill down the manager's spine. She smiled. It wasn't a smile of pain or shock. It was a knowing, almost pitying smile. A smile that said she knew a secret, a terrible and beautiful secret that was about to bring this entire world crashing down. But then, something happened that no one, not the smug manager, not her loyal staff, not the jeering customers, could have ever seen coming, when the woman who was slapped revealed who she truly was. If you believe every human being deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter what they look like, hit that subscribe button, type dignity, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. To understand how we arrived at this explosive moment, we need to rewind 8 hours to the moment Eleanor Vance first walked through those gleaming glass doors. Eleanor Vance, a black woman of 55, elegant in her posture but simple in her dress, was worth exactly $4.2 billion. She had built the Aura Collection, a luxury retail empire, from a single small shop into a global phenomenon with over 900 stores. But Eleanor had a rule. She always dressed in worn jeans, a simple cotton t-shirt, and old, comfortable sneakers. She drove a 15-year-old sedan. Why? Because she had never forgotten where she came from. Eleanor's own mother had once been humiliated in a department store, accused of stealing a scarf she had saved for months to buy. Eleanor had sworn on that day that if she ever had the power, she would build a world where no one would feel that shame again. Today, she had that power, and Caroline Wexler was about to learn that lesson in the most permanent way imaginable. Now, let's talk about Caroline. 45 years old with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a permanent air of dissatisfaction, she had been the manager of this flagship Aura Collection boutique for 10 years. But here was Caroline's secret. She was drowning in debt, living a life she couldn't afford to project an image of wealth she didn't possess. She had clawed her way up from a working-class background and now overcompensated by being absolutely merciless to anyone she deemed beneath the store's exclusive image. Caroline had built her entire management philosophy on one single toxic idea: protect the brand's prestige at all costs. To her, that meant aggressively gatekeeping, keeping out anyone who didn't look the part. And Caroline had an army. There was Liam, her 35-year-old assistant manager, who worshipped her and mimicked her every sneer. He believed Caroline was a genius, a protector of luxury. There was Marco, just 22, a cashier who saw Caroline as a mentor, a guide to the world of the elite he so desperately wanted to join. There was Sophia, a 28-year-old single mother working on commission who knew this was wrong but was too terrified of losing her job to speak up. And then there was Mrs. Davenport, a wealthy 60-year-old white customer who spent a fortune in the store every month. Caroline treated her like royalty, and in return, Mrs. Davenport acted as her biggest cheerleader, reinforcing her cruelest impulses. This was Caroline's court, her loyal followers who believed she was invincible. What none of them knew was that they were about to participate in the public degradation of the one woman who could erase their careers with a single, quiet word. 8 hours earlier, Eleanor Vance had walked into her own store, planning a routine, anonymous inspection. She'd received a series of complaints about this location: discrimination, a hostile work environment, customers being treated poorly. As the owner, she took these things personally, but she had no idea she was about to become the subject of her own investigation. So there was Eleanor, quietly examining a display of silk scarves, observing the store's flow, the staff's interactions. This was her method: blend in, be invisible, and see the truth. But Caroline Wexler had other plans. She saw Eleanor from across the store, and her internal alarms, conditioned by prejudice and insecurity, went into overdrive. She saw the worn jeans, the simple t-shirt, the old sneakers, and she made a decision. Without even a hint of courtesy, Caroline marched over, her face a mask of fake concern. "Oh, honey, are you lost? The public library is about 10 blocks that way." Just like that. No hello, no "can I help you?" Just pure dripping condescension wrapped in a poisonous sweetness. The tone was so patronizing, so demeaning, it was almost a caricature. Except this was real. Eleanor, maintaining her incredible poise, responded politely, "No, I'm right where I'm supposed to be." A normal person, a decent manager, would have backed off, perhaps offered genuine assistance, but Caroline wasn't normal. Her identity was built on exclusion. Her voice became a weapon of sarcasm. "Sweetie, I don't think you understand. This is a high-end boutique. These items," she gestured vaguely, "they cost more than your rent." The way she spat the word "sweetie" was designed to inflict maximum humiliation. She was speaking to a grown woman, a titan of industry, as if she were a child who had wandered away from her parents. And then Caroline did something that revealed her true nature. She started performing. Mrs. Davenport was nearby, inspecting a leather clutch. She had been a loyal customer for years, and Carolyn had cultivated her as an ally in her campaign of exclusion. Hearing the exchange, Mrs. Davenport chuckled, a dry, approving sound. That was all the encouragement Carolyn needed. Emboldened by her audience, Carolyn's voice got louder, making sure other shoppers could hear. "We cater to a very specific clientele here, people with the means to actually purchase our items." Eleanor, refusing to be baited, moved over to the handbag display. She was genuinely interested in the new collection, the craftsmanship, the presentation. These were her products, her vision, and she wanted to see them through a customer's eyes. But Caroline saw this as an act of defiance. She followed Eleanor, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble, and that's when she truly let loose. "Darling, that little handbag costs more than a used car. Are you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable at a department store? They have some lovely knockoffs." Caroline was laughing now, a cruel, mocking sound. The contempt in her voice was a physical thing. She wasn't just being rude, she was being deliberately vicious, trying to shatter Eleanor's dignity for sport. And here is where the scene turned truly ugly. Other customers began to gather. Word was spreading. A confrontation was happening. This was entertainment. People were abandoning their shopping to witness a public shaming. Caroline saw her audience growing and decided to lean into the performance. She turned, addressing the crowd like a ringmaster. Some people just don't know their place, do they? A man in an expensive suit actually laughed and nodded. She's right, you know. Another woman whispered to her friend, her eyes wide with amusement. The crowd was feeding the beast. They enjoyed watching this woman be put in her place. It made them feel superior, part of an exclusive club that Eleanor was unworthy of. Caroline was absorbing this energy, thriving on it. She continued, her voice now a theatrical boom. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to save you the profound embarrassment of having your credit card declined." Liam, the sycophant assistant manager, now stood beside her, his arms crossed in a show of solidarity. In his mind, Caroline was a hero, protecting the sanctity of the brand. Sophia, the single mother, watched from behind the register, her hands trembling. She knew this was a monstrous injustice, but her son's rent depended on her silence. Then Eleanor did something that pushed Caroline over the edge. She approached a mannequin displaying the centerpiece of the new collection, a stunning hand-beaded gown that cost $5,000. Eleanor reached out to touch the fabric, her fingers grazing the delicate beadwork. Caroline's eyes lit up. She had found her ultimate weapon. "Attention, everyone!" she yelled, her voice echoing through the boutique. "This woman wants to try on our $5,000 couture gown." The entire store went silent. Every single person, customer and employee alike, stopped and stared at Eleanor. Caroline had weaponized the price tag, turning it into a tool of mass humiliation. She was loving every second of it. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Eleanor stood there, bathed in the hostile glare of dozens of strangers, a solitary figure of dignity in a sea of judgment. Caroline broke the silence with a theatrical gasp. "Should I inform her that our fitting rooms require a pre-approved line of credit?" The crowd murmured. Some laughed nervously. Others whispered, enjoying the drama. Marco, the young cashier who so admired Caroline, actually giggled and whispered to Liam, "The boss is on fire today." This only fueled Caroline's ego. She was a performer now, working her audience. She looked Eleanor up and down with an exaggerated, contemptuous gaze and delivered the line she thought was her masterpiece. "Honey, that dress costs more than your entire life is worth." The cruelty was stunning, breathtaking in its totality. This was a human being systematically attempting to annihilate another person's self-worth in front of a live audience. And everyone was complicit, some by laughing, others by nodding, and the rest by saying nothing at all. Mrs. Davenport, emboldened by the mob, decided to join the act. "Really, dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "there are plenty of lovely shops that are more appropriate for your budget." Eleanor, showing a strength that seemed almost superhuman, asked to speak with the manager. She was giving Caroline one final off-ramp, one last chance to salvage some sliver of human decency. But Caroline simply spread her arms wide, basking in the spotlight. Congratulations, darling. You're looking at her, and I'm telling you that you are in the wrong store at the wrong time, wearing the wrong clothes. The crowd was growing. People were pulling out their phones, starting to record. This was going to be a viral moment, a public shaming for the digital age. Caroline was on a roll, and she knew it. "Let me guess," she sneered. "You saw our boutique on social media and thought you'd come play dress-up for the day. Well, this isn't a playground." Liam finally chimed in, his voice full of admiration. "Miss Wexler knows how to handle these situations. She's the best." Even the security guard at the door was nodding, completely trusting Caroline's judgment. And then Caroline delivered what might have been the cruelest blow yet. She gestured around the store as if presenting evidence. "Look around you, sweetie. Look at our real customers. Notice a difference. They belong here. They can afford to breathe the same air as this merchandise." It was beyond humiliation. It was dehumanization. She was literally saying Eleanor was a contaminant, unworthy of sharing the same oxygen as the store's products. The crowd was completely on her side now, nodding and murmuring their agreement. Eleanor was surrounded by a mob of hostile faces, all united in the belief that she was less than them. But it wasn't over. Oh no. Caroline had one more act of cruelty planned. She demanded that Eleanor open her handbag for inspection. She claimed it was store policy for suspicious individuals, adding with a smirk, "When someone so clearly doesn't fit in, we have to check for sticky fingers." She was now accusing her of being a thief. The implication was clear and vile. The crowd gasped. This had escalated from mockery to a direct accusation of criminal intent. Eleanor, her grace under this unimaginable pressure a thing of wonder, complied. But Caroline made a spectacle of it, rummaging through Eleanor's personal belongings in front of the entire store. "Let's see what we have here," Caroline announced, holding up items for the crowd to see. Keys, some tissues, and what is this? She found Eleanor's wallet. It was old, worn, and held together with a piece of electrical tape because Eleanor had owned it for 20 years and saw no reason to replace something that still functioned perfectly. To Eleanor, it represented her roots, her practicality. To Caroline, it was the perfect punchline. She held it up high. "Look, everyone, held together with tape. This is what happens when you try to shop in a world you don't belong in." The crowd erupted in laughter. They were pointing, whispering, taking pictures. Mrs. Davenport added, "Poor thing. She probably saved up for a year just to get a look inside." Another customer chimed in. "She probably uses food stamps to buy her groceries." The humiliation was absolute. Eleanor Vance, billionaire, philanthropist, and employer of over 60,000 people, had just been publicly shamed, degraded, and dehumanized by her own employee in her own store. If you were in Eleanor's position, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe if you're hooked on this story. Caroline delivered her final verbal blow with the supreme confidence of someone who believes they have utterly triumphed. "Ma'am, I am going to do you a favor. I'm going to save you from any more embarrassment. There's a very nice discount outlet down the street where you might actually be able to afford something." The crowd murmured its approval. Marco whispered to Liam, "She protected our brand so perfectly." Even employees from other departments had gathered to watch, all of them nodding, convinced they had just witnessed a masterclass in management. But here was the secret. Here was the detail that was about to turn this entire situation inside out. Eleanor had been quietly recording the entire interaction on her phone. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every single moment of this systematic dehumanization had been captured in perfect high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. She had Caroline's condescending remarks. She had the jewelry counter humiliation. She had the public announcement to the entire store. She had the wallet shaming. She had the crowd's active participation, all of it. Every last second. And Eleanor Vance had not built a multi-billion-dollar empire by backing down. She had built it by being smarter, more strategic, and infinitely more patient than her adversaries. The people in this store thought they had just witnessed a victory for exclusivity. They thought they had seen a manager brilliantly protect their pristine shopping experience from an unworthy intruder. What they had actually witnessed was the beginning of the end. They just didn't know it yet. Then came the moment that would haunt every person in that store for the rest of their lives. After all the verbal assaults, the accusations, and the public shaming, Eleanor tried to speak. And that's when Caroline's hand came up fast and connected with her cheek. The slap echoed through the boutique, a sharp, ugly sound that shocked everyone into a momentary stunned silence. Caroline stood there, her hand still slightly raised, breathing heavily, her face flushed with a toxic mix of adrenaline and triumph. She looked at Eleanor with a condescending smirk, as if she had just disciplined a misbehaving child. "Now, security will escort you out," she commanded, "so our real customers can finally shop in peace." The security guard stepped forward, ready to physically remove Eleanor. The crowd parted, creating a path of shame. They were all watching, phones held high, waiting to capture the final moment of humiliation as this woman was marched out like a criminal. This was it. The moment a billionaire was about to be forcibly ejected from her own store by her own security guard, while her own employees and customers cheered. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. But something was about to happen that none of them could have predicted. Something that would transform this moment of perceived victory into the start of their worst nightmare. Because Eleanor Vance, with the high-resolution recording of her own assault and humiliation secured on her phone, was about to make a call that would detonate every single life in that room. After being publicly assaulted and humiliated, Eleanor Vance did the one thing nobody expected. Instead of crying or fighting back, she turned and walked calmly toward the store's exit. But this was not an act of defeat. It was an act of war. Eleanor stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. The contrast between the toxic boutique and the quiet parking lot was jarring. Through the large glass windows, she could see Caroline basking in her triumph, regaling the adoring crowd with the story of how she had vanquished the intruder. Eleanor pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Her voice was calm, controlled, and utterly professional. This was the voice that closed billion-dollar deals, and it was about to close the book on Caroline Wexler's career. "Arthur, this is Eleanor," she said. Arthur Hayes had been Eleanor's chief of operations for 12 years. He had handled hostile takeovers and corporate espionage, but he had never heard this particular tone in Eleanor's voice before. I need our entire legal and security executive team at Boutique 72 immediately. This is a code red. Meanwhile, inside the store, Caroline was still celebrating. She saw Eleanor on the phone outside, and it only boosted her confidence. Carolyn actually strode to the window and shouted through the glass, "And don't bother coming back. Tell all your friends that people like you aren't welcome here." The crowd inside roared with laughter. They thought this was the perfect final touch. But Eleanor continued her conversation with Arthur, her voice never wavering. "Arthur, I need you to bring the ownership documents for this specific location. Also, pull all security footage from today. And Arthur, bring everyone from the board who is in town." There was a pause as Arthur asked a question on the other end. "No, Arthur," Eleanor replied. "This isn't about a lawsuit. This is about a lesson." Inside, Caroline turned back to her cheering fans. "Problem solved," she announced. "Now, who wants a glass of champagne to celebrate protecting our standards?" The crowd cheered. Mrs. Davenport was clapping enthusiastically. Several customers were genuinely thrilled at the prospect of free champagne, feeling they had earned it by participating in the defense of their exclusive space. Caroline walked over to Liam. "Liam, get the vintage champagne from my office. The good stuff. An occasion like this calls for a real celebration." Liam beamed and hurried to the back. Sophia began setting out champagne flutes, her hands still shaking, her face a mask of misery. Marco was bouncing with excitement, telling everyone around him how brilliant Miss Wexler was. "She was so strong, so professional," he gushed. "She really knows how to protect our reputation." The champagne was poured, and Caroline began making toasts. "To maintaining excellence," she declared, raising her glass, "to protecting what makes this place special." The crowd toasted with her, a sea of smug, self-satisfied faces, all feeling like they were part of something important. They had defended their tribe from an outsider, but outside, Eleanor was finishing a very different kind of call. "How long until you arrive, Arthur?" Another pause. "Excellent. And Arthur, make sure the entire executive board is patched in via video conference. They need to witness this. This is going to be a teaching moment for the entire company." Eleanor ended the call and looked back at the boutique. She could see the champagne celebration in full swing. She could see Caroline laughing, probably retelling the story with even more dramatic flair. She saw the faces of the customers who had laughed and jeered at her, now toasting their victory. What none of them knew was that in exactly 10 minutes, their entire world was going to come to a fiery end. Eleanor didn't move. She stood in the parking lot, watching and waiting, taking a mental inventory of every person celebrating inside. At precisely 4:15 p.m., 3 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled silently into the parking lot. They were the kind of vehicles that signaled serious business was about to be conducted. The doors opened, and out stepped some of the most powerful people in the global retail industry. Rachel Chen, the head of human resources for the Aura collection. David Lee, the chief of the legal department. Michael Rodriguez, the global head of security. And behind them, a team of lawyers, investigators, and corporate executives. This wasn't a meeting. It was a corporate rapid response team. Inside the store, the celebration began to falter as people noticed the arrival. At first, they were just curious, but As the team of stone-faced executives began walking purposefully toward the entrance, a sense of unease began to creep in. Caroline saw them coming, and her first thought was that they were important clients, perhaps drawn by the buzz of her excellent management. Maybe they were here to congratulate her, to offer her a promotion. As the team entered, Caroline put on her most dazzling professional smile and walked over to greet them. "Perfect timing," she said with unearned confidence. "I just handled a very difficult situation with a trespasser. You may have seen her outside. She was completely inappropriate for our brand, but I managed it with absolute professionalism." Rachel Chen, a formidable woman in her 50s with a reputation for surgical precision in corporate matters, looked around the store. She saw the champagne glasses, the celebratory mood, the smug looks on the faces of the staff and customers. "Miss Wexler, I presume," Rachel said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Yes, Caroline Wexler, store manager for 10 years. I've built an incredible team here, and we truly understand the importance of maintaining standards. I protected our brand and our valued customers. Everyone here will tell you." The legal team was already fanning out, observing, taking notes. Mrs. Davenport, still feeling empowered, stepped forward eagerly. She was magnificent, a true professional. She handled that awful woman perfectly. We all saw it. Other customers chimed in, a chorus of support for Caroline. They still believed these executives were here to praise her. But Rachel Chen's expression remained unchanged. If anything, it grew colder. "Miss Wexler, we need to discuss your management of a customer interaction today." Caroline's confidence peaked. She practically preened with pride. "Of course, I followed all protocols to the letter. I protected our reputation and ensured our valued customers felt safe and secure. It was a textbook example of brand management." She gestured around the room. "As you can see, our clientele is perfectly satisfied. We were just having a small celebration." Rachel Chen nodded slowly, her eyes like chips of ice. "I see. And you are confident that your actions today represent the core values of the Aura collection?" "Absolutely," Caroline declared. "I've been with this company for a decade. I know what we stand for: excellence, exclusivity, and serving a clientele that appreciates true quality. I protected all of that today." The legal team had finished their initial sweep and returned to Rachel's side. One of them whispered something in her ear. Rachel nodded. "Miss Wexler, I'd like you to meet someone." And that's when Eleanor Vance stepped forward from behind the corporate team. The store went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Every single person who had participated in the humiliation of this woman just moments before suddenly felt a cold dread creep up their spine, even though they didn't yet understand why. Caroline looked at Eleanor with a mixture of confusion and irritation. Yes, this is the woman. As you can see, she clearly doesn't belong here. I handled the situation perfectly. Rachel Chen's voice remained flat and calm. "Miss Wexler, meet Eleanor Vance." Caroline waved a dismissive hand. "Yes, I know who she is. The woman who tried to shop in a place she can't afford. I explained the situation to her very clearly." There was a pause that felt like an eternity. The entire store was watching, a growing sense of horror dawning on them. Rachel Chen delivered the words that would shatter Caroline's world. "The founder, CEO, and sole owner of the Aura Collection, your boss, The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was a vacuum. It was the sound of a world ending. Caroline's face went through a rapid series of transformations, from confident defiance to utter confusion, then to dawning, sickening horror as the words finally sank in. That's not possible, she stammered. She dresses like... Eleanor Vance finally spoke, her voice calm, controlled, and absolutely devastating. Like what, Caroline? Like someone who doesn't deserve to be treated like a human being? If this story is blowing your mind, you need to hit that subscribe button, because what happened next is going to redefine your understanding of justice. The realization struck the crowd like a physical blow. One by one, faces contorted from smug satisfaction to abject horror, as they understood the catastrophic nature of what they had done. Mrs. Davenport, who had been so arrogant just moments before, took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, "what have we done?" Sophia, the single mother, burst into tears. "Miss Vance, I am so sorry. I was just following orders. I didn't know. Please, I need this job." Marco, the young cashier who had idolized Carolyn, began to tremble uncontrollably, stammering apologies. The customers who had laughed and jeered, who had recorded the humiliation on their phones, now frantically tried to disappear, hoping to slink away before their participation was noted. But Eleanor had her own recording, and she remembered every single face. The champagne glasses suddenly felt like anchors in people's hands. The celebratory atmosphere had curdled into a waking nightmare of shame and regret. Caroline was in a state of complete and utter shock. Her entire identity, her whole world, had collapsed in less than a minute. "I didn't know," she whispered, the words empty and pathetic. "How could I have known? Your clothes, your wallet?" But Eleanor cut her off, her voice still quiet, but now ringing with an authority that shook the room. "My clothes are not an invitation for abuse. My wallet is not a measure of my worth. You didn't know who I was, Carolyn, but you knew I was a human being, and you decided that wasn't enough." The corporate team was documenting everything, every tear, every excuse, every pathetic attempt to minimize the cruelty they had all participated in. Rachel Chen stepped forward, her voice crisp and final. "Miss Wexler, based on the evidence we have collected, including a full video and audio recording of your actions, your employment with the Aura Collection is terminated, effective immediately." Security officers stepped forward and began removing Caroline's name badge and store keys. She was banned from all Aura Collection properties for life. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She addressed the entire store, her voice rising slightly for the first time, filled with a righteous power. "For the last hour, you all participated in the systematic humiliation of another person based on nothing more than her appearance. You judged me, you mocked me, you degraded me, and then you celebrated it." Every word was a hammer blow of truth. "You told me I don't belong here, Caroline, and you're right. I don't belong in a place that treats people this way, but this is my company, and I will make damn sure it reflects my values." The consequences were swift and merciless. Liam, the assistant manager, terminated for his active participation in the discrimination. Marco, the young cashier, demoted to a stockroom position, his pay cut, and required to complete a year of intensive bias and sensitivity training. Mrs. Davenport, banned from every Aura Collection store worldwide, her account permanently closed. Several of the most vocal customers who had joined in the mockery were also identified and banned for life. Eleanor announced a complete and total overhaul of the company's culture. New leadership, new mandatory training programs developed by leading civil rights experts, and new ironclad policies to protect both customers and employees. But her final message was the one that truly resonated. Dignity is not determined by the balance in your bank account. Respect is not purchased with a designer label, and belonging is not something that can be granted or denied by someone else's prejudice. Today, you all learned that the most dangerous assumption you can ever make is thinking you know a person's worth just by looking at them. The store that had been a stage for cruelty and exclusion was now ground zero for a revolution of values. And Eleanor Vance, the woman they had tried to break, was the one leading the charge, because sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes when the person you're looking down on is actually looking down on you from a height you couldn't even begin to imagine.